So welcome again to On the Park Bench, a public square conversation, connecting commercial corridors with Jason Hyman and Scott Snodgrass. And unfortunately, Nikki Knight is not going to be able to join us today. But join us for upcoming webinars. Next week, we have one on affordable housing strategies and implementation, May 7th at 12 noon Eastern Time. Go to cnu.org/resources/on the park bench. And of course, come to CNU 32 in Cincinnati. This is going to be an excellent program. We have a great turnout, and check out Cincinnati, which is a city with excellent urbanism going on and things to learn from. And you can learn more and register at cnu.org/cnu32. And today we have a panel on connecting commercial corridors from Houston, Texas. Jason Hyman is broker, principal partner, and owner of RealInk's office of Jason T. Hyman, Houston's only Black-led real estate brokerage offering urban planning services. His vision guides the office to bridge the generational wealth gap through real estate. He also founded the Third Ward Real Estate Council, a nonprofit dedicated to equitable real estate options in communities historically impacted by redlining, leveraging his infill development and tactical urbanism expertise. He promotes responsible development and investment while nurturing a community of emerging minority developers. And Scott Snodgrass is a founding partner of Meristem Communities, a Houston-based real estate development firm committed to creating places for people with mindful, fine-grained developments. Scott is an entrepreneur and former farmer who is focused on interconnected resilience in the natural, human, and built environments. His vision is being brought to fruition in Indigo, one of Meristem's first developments in the suburbs of Houston, built around human scale working farm and pasture. And once again, Nikki can't be with us. So welcome to you both to On the Park Bench. I'm Rob Steuteville, editor of CNU's Public Square, and we're going to have a presentation followed by a discussion among the panel and followed by Q&A from the audience. So please use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask your questions as they occur to you. And now I'm going to pass this along to Jason.
Right. If you can, I can share, Rob.
Hold on a second. Stop share. There we go. So you can now share.
All right, thanks. So Rob, I actually submitted a version of this for the conference this year. So we didn't get selected to share the topic. So I'm definitely, really happy that I get to share it here. I had the opportunity to share it here with you guys. I'll still be at the conference though, so anybody there, definitely reach out. Let's connect. So there's a lot changing in the way we live, so I thought it was important, especially around this year's theme of restorative urbanism when it comes to corridor revitalization. So I know I'm going to speak a lot more on revitalization, and you guys will get to hear Scott talk a little bit more about the development of sustainable corridors. So a little bit of uh, pre, post discussion here. So hopefully you guys enjoy. Um, so give me a second. Let me situate myself here. Um, so I took a moment, trying to figure out how best to explain or unpack really what we mean or what I mean when I say connecting corridors, because it could mean so many things. And so I actually went and took a look at the charter here for the Congress for New Urbanism. And it was pretty cool to see that essentially we really are embodying those principles around the neighborhood, the district, and the corridor. And so at least for us, we really look at the corridor as the backbone of the community, and it really connects the neighborhood and the district and kind of brings them all together. This also was really kind of just a funny way of us communicating, connecting corridors that would prompt people to say, connecting to what? And we would, joyfully say kind of everything. That's really how we look at it. If you do this correctly, your corridor or our corridor should really provide a lot that we need. So I want you to kind of think about it. So for us, like we look at the corridor as like a reflection of the community. So a healthy corridor for us is essential to having a healthy community. So if you really kind of sit back and think about things or visualize things, I would argue that like a healthy corridor is more of a public need. Um, I have a picture of this building here. It's the building that I'm going to speak on in a little bit. If you look at it, it's blighted building, nothing's really going on. And if we think about these three pillars of like health, safety, economic resources, and representation in the community, which is what we try to focus on here in Houston on this corridor, it kind of tells you what's going on in the neighborhood. So if you close your eyes, you look at this building or close your eyes and visualize a corridor that's thriving, it's kind of an indication of uh, the health, excuse the spelling there. It's usually an indication of like the health of the neighborhood, both physically and mentally. It's very different. For instance, you don't see a picture of people walking around or doing much here in front of this building versus if you think of a very thriving corridor, people are walking because they feel safe, both mentally and physically, they're able to walk around and get to things. And everything is there for them to do that. If you think about a healthy corridor that's full of businesses and activity or lack thereof, kind of gives you an indication of how money needs to be spent. Can we go to this area and be consumers, or do we need to go to this area and be investors at this stage or life cycle of what's going on? And then more importantly for us is a real visual representation of the representation of that neighborhood. Um, and so whether it's the signs that you see, the languages that they are written in is an indication of who lives there, the type of services, or maybe even think about cuisine that's offered. That's also an indication sometime of, who visits, but also who's there and who services it. And so we really think about the corridor not from just a tourism standpoint, but like how does it really service and connect to those people and needs that are behind the corridor. So I want to orient you guys with where we are in Houston before I kind of give you guys some examples of what we have going on. We're in Third Ward, which is, just southeast of maybe 2, 3 miles of downtown Houston. We're really pretty much sandwiched in between uh, downtown, Texas Southern University, the University of Houston, the Medical Center, um, and Rice University. So there's a lot of anchors around us that makes this corridor, um, you know, really prime for something to happen. But right now, there's still a lot of gaping holes. It once was an area that was very thriving, but over time, became what it is that we see today. And so people drive through corridors, and that's, for ours and most people's. When someone's driving through your major artery or your major corridor through your town or community, that it's what they see. Most people aren't driving through the neighborhood. So, like I said, what you see is more of an indicator there. Um, for us, people are driving from one anchor to the other, but not necessarily stopping in between, which is what we want them to do at times. We need that kind of balance between the neighborhood support and people coming to shop on the corridor, as well as those folks that are coming in to stop and dine with us at time to time as they're going to their destinations. So What we're going to talk about today in this stretch in our corridor on Emancipation is Emancipation Avenue in Third Ward. I'll say about a 2 mile stretch from um, about a street called Blodgett Street down to, I would say, a street called McGowan. So if you guys aren't familiar with the area, look up Emancipation Avenue and you can look at those cross streets. Along that corridor, um, there are some really good things. There's a brand new park, renovated building, just to kind of give you guys a visual, a renovated historic building across the street from the park, a large office building across the street from the park as well. But as you move away from things, it starts to get a little dicey in a sense. And so we took this approach of really wanting to get ahead of development. This area has rapidly gentrified over the past, let's call it just 3 to 5 years, where prices have really increased somewhere 200 to 300% in certain areas. But the commercial corridor still has not necessarily been touched because all of the data says that it's there's not enough income to support um, a commercial corridor, which we think is false. I just told you all the different anchors that are there. It's just that those people don't show on demographic reports. So it's just something to think about when you're talking about, urbanism, getting out from behind the desk and getting down the street and really understanding what's going on. So how can we start to leverage corridors right now, early on in these development cycles? And I want to talk about three things. One is how we think, one is how we connect, and the other is how we collaborate. And so first, how we think. I encourage everyone to think small. Um, and so that means very neighborhood scale. You'll hear Scott talk later. They're all about places for people. It's human scale. You're seeing a very big shift in the market just in the commercial space alone. I think I read that Atlanta is downtown is over 50% vacant office buildings, right? People are living differently. We're at home again. We work from home. And so how our neighborhood interacts with us is becoming increasingly important. And so you take a neighborhood like ours that has the makings of, in a sense, greatness, but still has some gaps and some things that need to be filled in. We found that when thinking small, taking incremental approaches and creating multiple uses in small spaces is really successful. So you take this particular site here that you see, this is just a 5,000 square foot lot. It's on a corner, but as you see from a programming standpoint, there's space for pop-up, there's covered space for pop-up, there's space for small retail, garden, there's courtyard to encourage social interaction. And then the building that's people look at as nothing has become somewhat of our art block. Okay. And so we're kind of using what we have there and making small investments that we can reap some gain from over time. So while we aren't able to necessarily utilize the space the way we can to its quote unquote highest and best, which is how we typically go at things, which is why most of our corridor isn't developed, right? Because they can't go highest and best right away. This is a approach where we can take time. It's best suited for, a lot of the neighbors in the area to work together. And we can take those proceeds or whatever profits we make from operating small markets and pop-ups to reinvest in the later building and fill gaps in our funding for the later development. The second thing we really focus and key in on is engagement. For us, that really equates to transparency and collaboration, so we can move a little faster. That's engagement in our research. We find that things like asset mapping is really helpful, but not just asset mapping. So you have it, but share that data. We include um, the community in that asset mapping exercise. So you see, we take regular bike rides to understand what's going on in the neighborhood. So we're out in the street, but we take a lot of the data that we collect and we share it, you know, publish it in a sense. Um, there's consistent programming. So at that particular site, there's consistent programming. Start small though. We're not doing everything every day. We started with just an event. We did a charrette. People came out. They were able to just hear what's going on and gain some excitement. And from that, later on down the line, we had another event. At this one, people were able to actually just utilize the space and see how it could feel. And then we had another one, for example, where folks came out and actually had field paint that we use, and folks marked off where things should go and what should be there. And it was so engaging to the point where at some point I suggested that there not be a garden, and they almost kicked me off the property. And so it kind of gives you a level of, you know, a litmus test of like what would be successful there, because these are folks that would use the space and they're telling me, you know, willingly. Um, there's promotion, right? Promotion of the space. So of course that sounds um, simple and straightforward. But again, I told you about where we are, which is very different from, for instance, where Scott is. It takes a different kind of promotion. Where we are, there's always already a bias or transparency of what's there and what's happening. And that's why the investment isn't necessarily there. So our promotion is not necessarily just of the space and what's going on there, but it's of the area as well. It's highlighting the different things that are going on that are great, that are positive. So people understand there are more things connected to this space than just us. So for example, we've talked to the local university about different art classes coming to rotate out what's happening on that particular art block. Um, we're connecting different resources to small businesses to get them ready to operate those retail spaces. We're having conversations with people about the different resources they need at the space as it's being done in real time. Okay, very iterative process, but yielding for us some great results. A little slower, but better results in terms of the engagement, what's going on to the broader um, goal. So promotion. And then last but not least, feedback. So I kind of spoke to that, but not just feedback on site. We even have shared it to where folks are able to give feedback online and continued feedback because we have like monthly kind of gatherings. So, and we bring these things up. So this transparency, this type of collaboration helps in revitalization and bringing more pride, more awareness to the area and what's going on. And the last thing I'll touch on is partnerships. I think we all know, but we don't always play as well in the sandbox. But if we could, we can do a lot more together. Again, if we go back, it takes that thinking small. It takes finding partners that think small like you. It takes finding partners that want to engage and building intentional relationships. So that's one of the key things here. One of the approaches that I took was really recognizing that folks like CNU Houston has a chapter here. I reached out. Hey guys, what's going on? How can we talk? How can we collaborate on raising awareness around the principles that I spoke of earlier? Reached out to organizations like the American Planning Association or even Strong Towns, who will be part of the conference here next month. We host our conference. We have an annual conference that we host here in Houston. And we're intentional about the folks that are involved and the principles that are being taught. So to increase those just very intentional partnerships in what we're doing and being very clear about what we want to do. There's being very aligned with our public resources. One of the things that I realized in working with a lot of local infill developers is that they were just developing, but they had no idea what was really going on in the area. And so we in Houston have a very good planning department as well as other resources that we can tap into. There was a plan called a complete community plan here done in Houston that really laid out everything that was needed for our area. And so we use that to just really govern ourselves. So I encourage folks to tap into those public resources and see what's available first. If you're talking about your economic development office, your housing maybe office, um, that are more geared towards maybe the economic activity or the housing activity that's needed in the city. They can give you a little bit of idea of what's going on so that you can align with them. That way you gain some synergies because in order to think small, in order to engage, which takes time, there are going to be some financing gaps, some subsidies, and some things that you're going to have to think about. If you don't have like a long, pocketbook or a bank that's really, really backing you at a high level. So uh, organizations here in Houston, like our TERS, is able to provide support for programming. Right now, for instance, they're offering $10,000 up to $10,000 to help raise buildings. So just think if you can use those funds, for example, to raise a building so that you can go back and do something to activate that space. Okay. So, and that helps towards the long term. There are also different subsidies at the city level, but we have to be, I think, a little bit more of advocates for small to our city officials and leaders so that they can put more products and more opportunities out, such as, smaller grants for smaller scale. Um, when I say grants for smaller scale, most that I've seen funding that goes out from cities is for 200 and 300 unit apartments or large developments that support a large workforce. But if we're changing the way we live, my argument is that the city should support that public need of how we're living now, which means that some of those same products that they use for large scale development should be refashioned for small scale development. Um, and those things need to start aligning. So if there's any officials or things like that on the line, I think that's something to consider. And that's not just even in the product, but the process in which they're administered as well. Because a small shop is very different from, a large shop that has, 20 people working, in one department versus, a shop of 3 or 4 that are doing something. So the application process has to be even different. So those are things that when we talk about partnership that we're advocating for, that we're communicating, those are all very, very important and have proven some success and gotten us this far in our efforts. And that now we are starting to align with other neighbors so that we can, in a sense, start to master plan things. So I have a very different angle that I'm speaking from. It's private sector, right? But it's also one of a resident. Um, and so I want you to think about that in terms of revitalization. It's very much so a incremental approach. And if Rob, we last time we talked about guerrilla urbanism. It really takes both those things into account. So if you have, questions to, you know, any of the project that I mentioned or any of the things that I spoke about, you can reach me at Jason T. Hyman, and that's my email there. But I'm gonna stop here and I'm gonna let Scott chime in because I think he has a very different angle. He's gonna, I think, talk a little bit more about how to avoid some of the things we're dealing with on our end. So Scott, I'll stop sharing here. Rob, I don't know if you want to stop taking any questions, if you want us to just, keep going into this discussion.
Let's finish the presentations and we'll take questions.
Okay. And so reminder to everybody to fill up that Q&A down there as you're thinking of questions. Go ahead and toss them in there as we're going along. I'm Scott Snodgrass with Meristem Communities, and we imagine a world where cars, corporations, and capital aren't the primary stakeholders in our planning and development processes, but they're centered around people. And certainly we may use cars, corporations, and capital as tools in our living, but they aren't the primary stakeholders. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Indigo Commons today. And so Indigo Commons is the mixed use town center of our neighborhood Indigo that we're currently developing, that's under construction in the southwest suburbs of Houston. It's going to be 661 single family homes and about 150 apartment units spread through a few different formats. And Indigo Commons itself is about 12 acres, centered right at the heart of our community, with a small suburban farm as the gateway to the community. And like Jason mentioned, there's a lot of similarities to what's going on emancipation and the way that we are looking at developing a retail corridor. But there's also some differences because this is greenfield development. I'll wait for all the boos and hisses to pass for a minute. But this is greenfield development. And in our market, like many, we are in a desperate need for more housing. And so there's probably some greenfield we still need to do while we redevelop the areas that need to be intensified with more gentle density as well. And then greenfield's going to happen in Houston. It's not going to stop. We don't have the boundaries constraining our growth that many cities do. And so we also like to believe that maybe we can do it a little bit in a better framework, both for people and the environment, than maybe is being done currently. And so I'll run you through a few things here, but just as a framework, we're in the southwest suburbs of Houston, kind of where the toll roads are ending, or close to where they're ending. We're just outside the third loop, which is called the Grand Parkway, Highway 99 that you see there, close to the Brazos River, between Sugarland and Katy, officially in the ETJ of Richmond, but also parts of our property were unincorporated county as well. And so what we're trying to do is develop a small business community through the corridor that essentially separates our residential and commercial areas in our community. And while the commercial areas are mixed use, and we do anticipate there being quite a bit of rental apartments in that space, all of our for sale homes are separate and at least across the street here from these mixed use buildings. And we originally, we designed this neighborhood out with the idea that we are not serving the family formations that make up our communities anymore. In the suburbs of Houston, we build homes for nuclear families with 2 parents and multiple kids. And that is now like 20% of our family formations. And so why are we only developing in that pattern still? I think Eric Kronberg posted something the other day that was showing how upside down we are and what we have in the market and our housing supply versus what the household formations of today and tomorrow are going to need. So we have a lot more single folks living in homes. We have a lot more people who are unrelated and not romantic partners living in homes. We have a lot of single parent households. Our baby boomers are, pretty much done with kids out of the house now and are empty nesters. And so we've got this big shift that's happened in the past 5 or 7 years. And we were very thoughtful in the way that we designed the housing. But we realized as we were designing these retail areas that we were stuck in maybe a commodity mixed use mindset. And we were still developing, 10,000 square foot plate buildings with, 2 and 3 stories, something very easy to bank, very easy to find a construction company to do, very easy to find other developers to jump in on some of these projects. As we're the land developer, we won't necessarily develop everything vertical. And we realized we needed to step back, take a more human focus, and we started looking at the successful areas in town, these corridors that were successful and corridors that weren't successful and were in decline. And we saw the work that Jason was doing on emancipation and said, okay, how do we design a place that never even falls into decline like that? Like, there are reasons those corridors fall into decline. A lot of them are policy-based. A lot of them are race-based. A lot of them are based on the removal of any resources going into that space, or sometimes just hard barriers to citizens on their own being successful and banding together and being successful. so that we knew when we created this corridor, we wanted it to be a place that small business owners could have their own sense of community as small business owners. So I'll get to the land plan in a little bit, but I wanted to run through just briefly kind of what we are offering and why we're doing it that way. And so we have a bunch of what we call incremental retail buildings. This is the brochure that we shared with people who want to look at this this idea. But the goal is to have these tenant occupied or owner occupied buildings where the tenant is the owner. So we want a small business to own the building. And so we offered 3 different pathways to get there, because there may be some people who really want their fingerprints on the building. They want to adjust the building for the needs of their business. They want it to look like their personality and fit them. So we had the build your own building purchase pathway, which is where we're just selling a pad site with architectural controls, and then you're going in and building that building. Then we had the build to suit option for the business owner who would want some customization, but didn't really want to manage the construction process, and we could step in and help with that. And then we have the full Monty, which is named after Monty Anderson, who I'm sure plenty of you know or are familiar with, the Incremental Development Alliance, and now with Neighborhood Evolution. But Monty does really great small scale, just really tailored to business retail developments. And they're wildly successful for that reason, that he's really thinking about the needs of the business when he develops a space. And he does some for sale and he leases some. And both formats seem to work. So in this format, we were actually building the building and selling it directly to someone. And you see all the details down here at the bottom. One of the big differences here is that we tailored all of these to work with the SBA's 504 and 7A programs. So the Small Business Administration will give a 25-year mortgage to a small business for property that they're purchasing. If they're purchasing a pre-existing building, they only have to occupy 51% of that building. So there's even opportunities to lease out other spaces and have income based on that. And we saw that 25-year mortgage. It's not a 25-year amortization. Like anybody can go get that loan from a bank, but it renews every 5 years. And if the market turns down in that time period, then you might lose your ability to refinance that building and lose the building. So we really wanted those long-term mortgages, just like we've done for homes, that have made homeownership a little bit more accessible. Wanted to work alongside those programs. So we actually designed the buildings with that in mind. And the SBA was kind enough to come out to some of our events and speak to our potential buyers there. But here's the format of the building. And so these are flexible. It's kind of a kit of parts, 2 and 3 stories, 20 feet wide, about 40 feet deep. We wanted to create a small footprint as we feel like a lot of businesses that are trying to get up and running really struggle, because 2,000 or 3,000 square feet might be the smallest format that's available for rent. And so we wanted to offer some smaller formats for people. So this shows you, a 2-story that's retail on the bottom floor, office above. It's just your business, and you're running it out of this space. You might also, want to live in the same space or live right above your retail space. And so this is an option where, there's 700 square feet downstairs and there's 699 square feet upstairs. And you're actually, your business is occupying 51%, but you're also living in the space. And so now that 25-year mortgage is covering both your space for your business and the place you live, or maybe you're leasing it out. Same thing in 3-story, looking at apartments, townhomes, a bunch of different formats just to get people going with the idea of this. And these are individual buildings that have air gaps between them. So what you see in the column there I have a cursor here. What you see right here is actually one building with a 2-inch air gap between it and the next one. In our market, that's mostly related to insurance for the building and a little bit of making entitlement easier through our cities. So this is the land plan for Indigo Commons. Harlem Road at the very bottom of this is the existing major thoroughfare that we take access off of. And the residential part of the neighborhood is to the top, left, and right surrounding Indigo Commons. But we've created along Mercantile Street there at the top a corridor of those incremental retail blocks, as well as some multifamily buildings. The filling station and the mill or the filling station is a general store. The mill is going to have a small food hall, some co-working space, and a brewery within it. And then the barn there towards the bottom of the page is an event center. And so we just wanted to create it in a format that densified the retail opportunities close enough together that we would get the human energy to really support what most developers in our area consider a much higher ratio of retail to residential than they would believe would be able to be supported. But the interest that we've had in these has been so tremendous, and we have a number of them already, with registration payments down on them, and are getting ready to re-engage with the marketing on these. And we'll have one under construction here in the next 60 days or so, which will be exciting. But we've really tried to create this corridor space here that connects to the community. It's not necessarily connecting in multiple developments, but because it's located right across the street from all the residences and all of our homes are within a 7-minute walk of this space, we've created a place where we're connecting the residential homes into the retail as much as we can. And with that, Robert, I think we'll be happy to take questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Jason and Scott, for those presentations. I think that we'll ask a few questions, and then we'll get to the Q&A. I wanted to let people know that if you have questions, please ask them in Q&A. We're already getting some. One question I had, which maybe is more for Jason, but perhaps it relates to you, Scott, as well, and that is in corridors. Really, there's a lot that's going on, especially in a corridor like Emancipation Avenue. You have all these different property owners and different developers, but you also have the actual corridor of the street, which is a public space owned by the city or a public entity. And in order to transform that corridor or change it, get it all connected together, you have to have these different entities working together. And how do you get these different entities working together? How do you maybe get the city to invest in the street itself? How do you get various developers working together on that corridor to make it something more?
Sure. So, man, so this is kind of twofold. I don't want to say it's a long story, but it has been a journey. One of the things that I probably didn't really key in on is that whether you're from the outside coming into the area or you're already there, the community building begins first. And so, for example, I think I saw the other day someone said they bought like a block in a small downtown, and now they're looking for tenants, right? We should have kind of probably been connecting with the community there first and letting know what's going on. So where I'm going is that I'm here. This is my backyard. And so I'm not just looking at real estate. I'm involved in the civic clubs. I'm involved in everything that's kind of going on in my neighborhood. I live here with my family. And so, with that being said, I've been very vocal about the things that are needed. I use things like our civic association. We have a super neighborhood system here in Houston, which is part of the city's charter. So we use our super neighborhood to voice different things. And then just we were lucky enough, I don't want to say lucky enough, but Emancipation Park, which has a very big historical significance, had about $30 million invested into it not long ago. It's been less than 10 years. And so that's prompted a lot of other investment, Rob. And so that's gained interest of people. So one, the city already had kind of started taking measures because of the advocacy that had been going on the ground, and just the market changing as well. Our mayor initiated what's called Complete Communities, which was a program the previous mayor initiated a program called Complete Communities, where they really took a hard look at 10 core communities here in Houston that needed some gaps filled. And so ours was one of them. So it wasn't too hard to get them looking, but it has been an effort being vocal to keep them aligned. I'll say in terms of our specific corridor, Nikki was not able to be here, but the Southeast Management District, the organization that she represents, I think has been a very good ally in that. Um, they're responsible for the programming on these corridors and what's happening. So they're really into what it looks like. They support the owners because they tax the owners. So we're very vocal with them as well. And so all those things are coming together, and a lot of times they are a voice for us on behalf of us when we aren't able to communicate kind of as residents. That's one piece. The second piece of your question, you're saying, how do you get the developers to work together? And so that has been somewhat of a journey as well. We really look at things as more of a homegrown aspect. We don't, our neighborhood is not a place for probably the outside investor right now, right? The market is just not going to look good on paper for them. But for me and neighbors and folks here that live with us, or really align with the third ward area, or just the things that are happening in our area because it's happening in theirs, we started training ourselves. So we're at CNU meetings, we're at different conferences together, and then we kind of formed our own organization as well to just kind of do a lot more peer-to-peer sharing, and partnering to really just empower ourselves. And so one of the things that we've worked towards to kind of coordinate ourselves better, Rob, is that this year we'll have, aside from our conference in June, where we meet and um, not just network, but we have some interaction goals within the conference as well for the area. Um, we also have a set of design standards for our area that we're publishing this year to share with the local developers, and a few other, kind of incentives, even from helping people raise funds and structure their deals and provide technical assistance. So we're incentivizing people to come and build here and kind of build, I don't say in our way, but we're making it easy for them to build what we want here, if that makes sense.
And Scott, how do you sort of make everything work together? It's a little different. You've got a single developer, but also since you emphasize this, how do you ensure that the investments are going to not decline in the future and be successful in the long term?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of large singular developments. There's a lot more that fail than are successful. I think we can probably all agree that eventually, it may take 30 years, but a lot of those are eventually going into decline. So we're the land developer. So we're acting essentially on behalf of a city in some ways. We're providing utilities, we're paving the streets, but all of those are going to become public resources eventually. Our streets will all be public right of way. Well, most of them will be public right of way within our community. So we still have to coordinate with the county and the city and work through. And as most new urbanists out there know, so much of what makes the charter powerful is illegal to do in most places. You cannot build it that way. And so we've been working a lot to get through some of those hurdles and convince of the value. I think, frankly, we're a bigger risk to a city because we're a bigger project, but also we can invest the resources in doing more design work up front than a lot of people can on smaller projects. And so that allows us to show a more complete picture to those cities and get everyone on board. But in some ways, we get to control some of those resources that everyone's talking about. I mean, we have a municipal utility district that we get to, determine how that infrastructure is built. And so we get to act as a city a little bit there. But then I think most importantly, we don't want to just be one developer with one set of fingerprints on everything in the community. So we're developing the land. We're determining what the brand of the community is, who do we expect is going to live there? What is some of the programming happening? We do a lot more work on the residential side, but on the commercial side, We actually want to have a whole host of vertical developers doing the construction in the space. We'll do some of it likely, especially to get things started, but we want there to be a lot of different fingerprints because that diversity is what creates resilience. If we go build every building the exact same, not only is it boring, but then it also is a lot less resilient because if that format of building ended up not being a good one, well, we have 50 of them and we're in trouble. And so we believe that the diversity of having a bunch of different developers working in one space. So what, Jason's talking about, right? You've got multiple assets that are, ready for redevelopment. And, how do you encourage different people to work in those? In Jason's case, people within the neighborhood. I think the same thing for us. We want people who live within Indigo to also be business owners and own some of those buildings as well.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll go to the Q&A. When people think about Houston, though, they think about it doesn't have zoning. I mean, that's, it's sort of its reputation. I don't know whether that's the case in the suburb that you're working in, Scott, but a question would be, in terms of revitalizing these corridors or transforming them, does it help or hurt or maybe both to not have zoning or to have the regulations that you have in place in Houston? That's one, but also, what can people from around the country learn from Houston's example?
I will say our jurisdiction, the city of Richmond, does have zoning. They do have mixed use as one of those zones, and it's a fairly good definition. So we were able to use that. And then because of our size and our scale, we're 235 acres, which in the Houston suburbs is actually relatively small. When we travel other places in the country, it's massive. But having 235 acres to develop, most cities are going to treat you just as a specific plan. And so like they're going to make adjustments for your neighborhood based on the plan that you want to submit. And so I think that's been relatively easy in that regard. The things we've looked at within the city of Houston, sure, there's not zoning. And I think that's really been great for the mixing of uses. And Houston has some great walkable neighborhoods. We actually, in some areas, do really well with that. But there's still other controls that are a problem. It's not like just because we don't have land use zoning that means you can do everything that you would want to do. There's still minimum lot sizes. There's still height controls and all those things. But I'm sure Jason has a lot more experience with those.
In terms of the policies.
Of dealing with zoning, yeah, and what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Luckily right now, I guess just specific to that, and when we talk about emancipation, one of the reasons we wanted to focus there is because the city wanted to pilot a more walkable area. And so they did some studies and came out with a walkable places ordinance, as well as a transit-oriented development ordinance. And so both actually support walkability by helping us reduce cars. And so both those ordinances pretty much speak to us being able to use a commercial corridor and push those cars kind of behind the buildings, widen sidewalks, things of that nature. But that's not how it is today. And it's just the rule, right? I think the biggest thing is, to your point, or to your question, Rob, how do you begin to actually get those developers in the area to utilize the policy? So to your point, Scott, very different application of the policies. You guys are pushing it a different way, pushing on those levers a different way.
So we have the question, what are some creative ways to finance projects and secure commercial property, especially in undervalued areas?
Sure. I'll say in terms of that, one particular one is reaching out to those owners if you can get in touch with them, partner with them. We find that a lot of the owners, they have dreams and goals too, but they're lacking maybe the experience, they're lacking maybe the capital, but they'll work something out to be able to maybe do something in the short term as well as in the long term. Um, the other thing that we find in terms of capital um, is kind of a mix of just different sources, being flexible with, you know, public funding and being creative with it. So for us in Houston, that may mean we have a Houston Community Land Trust, we have a Houston Land Bank, we have a Housing and Community Development Department, we have a TERS. All of them have funding. And so while they don't have a specific product for me, um, I can figure out what I need and go and have the conversation with them. We're at a point in time where I think the country's looking for solutions. And so I think the onus of responsibility is on us to kind of practice these principles that, we all look at in this or abide by in this charter.
And I'll add that most of the work that we're probably talking about doing in this room is not the standard commodity. So don't look to the standard commodity financing model. That's why we talk about capital not being a primary stakeholder. They want to be right down the lane, the standard way that everyone is done. And I think really you can do yourself some favors by looking for debt and equity groups who have ESG or DEI language on their websites, talk about what they're trying to
Yes.
accomplish with their lending. There is a lot of money that is now trying to be placed into projects with social good specifically. And so that's a place to go. I would say don't be afraid to talk to private lenders instead of banks. It will be more expensive. Our entire community is being done with private lenders. We don't have a single bank involved. It's a lot more expensive, but it means almost no covenants, like very few covenants, a lot of flexibility, and they're used to working in uncertain times. That's a little bit more of I would say, their playbook. So they're a little more flexible if you have a downturn in the market. And then the other thing I would add is there's some great real estate crowdfunding websites out there. Small Change is one of them. And Small Change also has the same kind of DEI and ESG goals as well that its investors are doing. So if you're trying to raise a small to medium amount of money, $100,000, $300,000, $500,000, those crowdfunding platforms might be a great way, not just to raise
Absolutely.
the money, but to get your community that you're developing in invested in the building as well.
Yeah. And I'll just one other thing to that. Um, I'm with you, Scott, like the banks, right? But with the banks, it's a little harder. But what I'm going to say is that banks are always, risk averse, so they're always going to be kind of the last to change in a sense, from my perspective. But what I'll say is, uh, a lot of the conversation I have is that they want the feedback now so that they can take that and figure out how best to service the market. So I think the more conversations and more transparent we are, with all of these different arms that we both spoke of, it really helps drive the conversation.
There's a question when it comes to connecting commercial corridors, what are some of the ways that you can build community between the activations? Because on a corridor, you may have an activation, then you may have a gap, and then another activation, another node, or another piece of activity. So what do you do in between?
Yeah, so for us, it's we kind of formed a group. And so even though, the corridor is one of our focuses, we just meet regularly. So we kind of do two things. One, we meet regularly, monthly, just kind of in a social setting. Two, we meet quarterly from a technical perspective. We to train one another, to exchange what each other is doing. And then last but not least, we're online. So we have like our little Facebook group and different things like that where we're sharing what's going on, different news, different lead policy, different projects, whatever we feel like really affects, our space. So that's how we tend to engage in between those activations. And we're always, I want to say, we're always growing, and as people are coming in, they help increase the community kind of gets involved, right? And they increase those they kind of, to Scott's point, like they kind of take hold of things. I get calls from people that are like, well, can I do this and can I do that? Well, I'll have to figure out it's a set of, rules and standards or whatever the case is. But I think that's the energy that you want when you're doing these. At least from us, this is kind of like a public-private space, but it's a social meeting spot for the neighborhood. So getting that kind of feedback is exciting for us.
Um, there is a question, how do how do each of you engage the local government to influence policy around small scale developments?
So on our end, some of it was getting our land plan approved and just like literally having to sit in meeting after meeting with, city officials and county officials going through and talking about how to handle all of the special rules that we needed to make it work. And then there's kind of the level above that, I think maybe, which is really more of the question here is like, how do you get public policy to shift over time? And I think that really we need a bunch of examples that have been successful so that those city officials, because like to be honest, they're afraid of changing things because if it doesn't go well, it reflects poorly on them and they want things to go well. And so we've just really worked with city officials to find measured risk they can take that works for them. They can take that risk in one time. We prove the concept there, and then we can take it and expand it from there. And so, like Jason's talking about these pilots, I think that's a great way to get there is start small, start in a specific neighborhood, start with focus, give it a really good try, and then prove the success that, these ideas that are in the charter are meaningful and real and work. And sometimes that means, like in Texas, we have distrust. Our city officials often have a distrust of what works in California and what works in New York. So we need to find local examples too that maybe are a little bit closer to home.
I'm going to let Jason answer that, but first I'm going to let people know that we are at the end of an hour, and we are going to post the video to CNU's website tomorrow. So if you need to go, you can come back and watch, the remaining questions. We're going to take a few more questions and continue the conversation for a little bit longer. So I don't know if Jason, you had any response to that, the local government question.
Yeah, I guess we kind of take a twofold approach. I think Scott kind of alluded to it. One is, high level. And so we've been working at, for instance, a toolkit. So just really documenting what's going on, sharing some of those best practices and principles along the way, but also packaging it up so that, it's one cohesive document that we can really campaign behind and get more people to share and really spread the word. So there's that awareness and that education that we've been slowly kind of swelling up. And then on the flip side, it's meeting that education with something tangible. And so, the corner we spoke of, for instance, we anchor a lot of our language and a lot of our awareness, for instance, to that as a tangible example, for instance, and that way we're able to take something tangible to the city. So if there's a permitting issue, if there's something like that, we have it to say, here is the site. We don't have to speak in, possibilities, so to speak. We can go through the friction somewhat and hopefully work it out and create a model that no one else has to go through that same thing.
There was a question, an interesting one for you, Scott. And do you have any sort of curation plan for picking the people and ensuring a good mix of like third places, food and beverage, neighborhood service, office, convenience, various kinds of experiential retail, etc., in your little corridor in Main Street?
I think this is a really good question because I think a lot of at our scale at least, I think a lot of the commercial spaces and mixed use spaces that have been developed in sort of a new urbanist framework have ended up with their retail spaces being all luxury goods and experiential retail, like Jake is mentioning here. And I think again, that is it's really a problem for the adaptability and resilience of that space because those businesses are not actually the businesses serving people's everyday needs that people are going to have no matter what. And so I think it's a great question, Jake. And I would say that the control we're going to have is who we sell these to in the first place. We've been very careful we do have a commercial association, but we've been very careful to strip those rules down to the bare minimum because we've seen too many instances where adaptation is needed in a retail space. And this happened in the city of Sugar Land in our suburbs. The city actually wrote this wonderful mixed use code. We helped consult with them on it and answer questions and make comments to the code. But then the city actually couldn't get that implemented anywhere because the commercial associations all had rules that were recorded onto the deeds of the property that supersede what the city was trying to allow. And so I think it's really important that we strip down those requirements. We start it off in the right way with the right design and the right programming support around it. But then at some point, you have to push the baby bird out of the nest and just hope that it takes flight.
How about you, Jason? Is there any curation that goes on in Emancipation Avenue?
Yeah, so the curation is it's a little different. So for us, there are, of course, a mix of landowners and a mix of different business needs and uses. So for us, it really comes down to, what's there, what's existing. And, if there are 100, if there's a good number of us that are willing to plan and coordinate, um, then that's how we have chosen to go about it, so that we know where the next barbershop is coming versus where the next coffee shop versus so that we don't have all the same thing and there is something cohesive there. So that's been our approach, which you know will be eventual. Sounds like what Scott is setting up the community for.
Well, I think I'm going to bring this to a close unless either of you have any like final words or something that might have been missed significantly that you wanted to say. If not, I mean, there's other things I'd like to talk to you guys about, but maybe for another discussion. Maybe in Cincinnati if you're going to be there. Um, with that, I will say thank you very much for participating in this, and thanks everybody for listening. And we'll see you soon, hopefully in Cincinnati.
Thank
All
you.
right, thanks, Rob. See you there.
Bye.